Quote, "If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together." Unquote. Lila Watson for the Aboriginal activists group Queensland, 1970s. This quote can serve us as a start for the understanding of freedom I will argue for in this episode. The liberation of all for there to be actual, real freedom. For that, we will look at choice feminism and its understanding of oppression, and also talk about the N-word, neoliberalism. I announced this topic in my video on the history of feminism, and in my humble and unbiased opinion, I would say that it would be very helpful to watch that video first for a bit of understanding of what the 4 waves of feminism are, but it's also possible to just watch this video if you hate me and don't think my other videos deserve clicks. Let's of course start with some background knowledge about choice feminism and neoliberalism. What is choice feminism? It is actually not a distant academic school of thought that we have to learn a definition of. It is instead most of mainstream feminist posts we see online and attitudes or opinion of people in Hollywood movies or Netflix shows. At its core, choice feminism argues that the feminist movement is about the choices that women make. These choices should be free, while oppression means the inability to choose. It is therefore impossible to choose your own oppression, since an individual choice already is the expression of freedom. Ultimately, we are at a point in the history of feminism where we should not judge but celebrate all decisions women make if they are quote-unquote free and made with a political consciousness. If we do judge them, we are not girls. The goal behind this is to make feminism an open and inclusive movement that is accessible for all. That sounds reasonable enough, but let's look at the underlying assumptions made by these claims to see what they are grounded on. As Ferguson describes in a paper on choice feminism that will continue to be important in this video, there are 3 central assumptions made. First, freedom is understood as the ability to make individual choices, while oppression is the inability to choose. I already kind of said this, but let's repeat it again. What defines oppression is that it makes people unable to choose. Second, we should avoid making judgments of women's choices. Here it is important to remember the historic criticism faced by the feminist movement. In the past, especially the second wave of feminism was heavily criticized for being too judgmental and radical. This criticism is adapted by choice feminism and serves as a new guideline for a less judgmental movement. Thirdly, choice feminism adapts the early 2000s idea that we are now post-feminist. The women's movement in the past has achieved the conditions for women to make free choices and thereby ended oppression in the sense that it was defined above. This success should be celebrated and is executed by every woman making a free choice nowadays. Let me say here that this is in fact a very harsh description of choice feminism, and I would argue that it is a bigger field with different opinions, not all of which consider women today as totally free. Also, as you might guess, the focus of this is pretty much on the global north. The main takeaway is the idea that freedom is bound to choice, and that individual choices of women are expressions of said freedom. It is the focus on the individual that is so crucial here, as this is embedded in a larger political trend towards individualization and responsibility, which in turn is connected to neoliberalism. What is neoliberalism? This section of the video will definitely not be enough to even come close to defining neoliberalism. I'm currently planning on making a whole video about this topic as I'm reading into it right now. However, I actually am not opposed to the use of the term in a very associative way and as a placeholder for many possible words and concepts, if the general trends are understood. So I want to give a short insight into what I mean when referring to neoliberal capitalism in this episode. As a basic information, neoliberalism is a term that is supposed to describe the type of capitalism most countries live in today. In comparison to systems of capitalism in the 20th century, it is not a choice made by some states, but often considered to be the only option now, since the end of the Soviet Union as the big opposing system to Western capitalism. Neoliberalism is a philosophy based on deregulation, market and competitive freedom, and self-responsible individual consumers. Some of the developments I will name now might be entangled with the inevitable consequences of capitalism coupled with globalization, digitalization, and a growing population, but I will still refer to them as neoliberal phenomena here since they fall under the premise of a free market and individualization. Such developments are uninhibited consumer culture, marketization of all areas of human life, and depoliticization. This depoliticization occurs out of a focus on the individual responsibility of everyone, making personal problems, financial difficulties, mental health issues, and career obstacles seem as the fault or responsibility of each individual person. It is your merit if you succeed, but it is also your fault if you don't. The state, government, or political issues in general are not even in the equation. Also, depoliticization arises out of the feeling that the free market is an independent actor, not at all influenced and upheld by the state. I'm not saying that that is the case, but it does often feel like that, especially in activism. It seems impossible for activists now to even reach something in politics if even the state is presented as detached from the economic developments. This trend can actually be observed in all kinds of movements, like for instance in climate activism. Looking at the history of the claims made by climate activists throughout the last and current century, there is a stark shift after the 1990s. Suddenly, the demands turned away from being directed to fossil fuel industries or governments and required individuals to reflect on their consumption behavior instead. While a lot of these individual adaptations might not be bad, it is crucial to understand what this shift leads to. It depoliticizes the movement to focus on these things and is very convenient for the people in power if the movement is just about individuals changing their consumption behavior with a lot of effort. Within the context of feminism, the same development arose after the 90s with the girl power marketing. While seemingly encouraging women to pursue their dreams and careers, it also works closely tied together with neoliberalism. Basically, it is about women taking up the same hierarchical positions of power men hold in capitalism, while also consuming a lot of traditionally feminine products and looking great 24/7. It is a way for capitalism to align with the feminist movement. You can have it all and should have it all, and please wear expensive clothes and get your nails and hair done before. These circumstances of depoliticization, individualization, and adaptation of social movements into consumer and market-driven capitalism is what I will refer to as neoliberalism here. If you're interested in the full video about neoliberalism that will be released hopefully soon, consider subscribing to this channel. Having all of this in mind, let's first look at what is good about choice feminism. I know that the way I presented the information above was by no means neutral, and of course these videos will always have a tendency shaped by my own opinions, but I still want to try to at least look at both sides. Most importantly, let's look at what the intentions behind choice feminism are from the side of its proponents. Because if you think about it, it is not the fault of someone coming up with a concept if it is then incorporated by neoliberalism. We have to evaluate it for what it actually aims for. If you remember from before, choice feminism tries to make feminism accessible to all. While the second wave of feminism was often heavily catering to the living experience of white middle-class women, choice feminism wants to find a way to make the movement more inclusive. In order to do that, we have to celebrate all choices women make, since otherwise we will turn against our own friends and family and become too judgmental. In a world where academic feminist literature is not at all low threshold, it is likely that only certain types of people will have access to it. Choice feminism wants to avoid that these groups turn against others in a radical or judgmental way. The goal is to make feminism compatible with everyday life, not just for those who live within an environment where everybody has read Simone de Beauvoir, Audre Lorde, and bell hooks. This can then lead to a bigger feminist movement globally, since people can unite without going against each other. Women should support women, to build larger groups of solidarity and ultimately increase political leverage. If the movement only allows people in it who do not have any behavior even slightly in contradiction to feminism, it will stay small forever. Another point is the big question of freedom. In the feminist movement, some lifestyle choices like a stay-at-home mom, certain styling and clothing have been criticized since they were often not at all a choice, but often the only option to be accepted by society. Now, however, it is possible that someone really chooses to pursue them because they fit their personal preferences. If this choice is genuinely made by an educated individual with other different paths also available to them, can we really condemn and judge that? Or worse, want to force them to do otherwise because it does not fit our feminist ideal that a woman would voluntarily choose that? If we do not take her choice seriously, we end up infantilizing women and denying them their free will. Also, even if her decision is influenced by her societal surroundings, we cannot ask of anyone to wait until the world is perfectly equal until they can embrace their own wants. This is probably the hardest to evaluate aspect of choice feminism, and I will talk more about it in a bit. For now, let's remember that choice feminism embraces solidarity among women for a wider acceptance of feminism in society and celebrates choices made by politically conscious individuals. Okay, let's take a look at choice feminism from the position of its critics. For that, we will both consider the advantages I just named and the underlying assumptions made by choice feminism, which I talked about before. While choice feminism is very popular on social media and in public discourse, there's a lot of criticism towards it in academia. The sources I'm using here are, as always, in the description. 1. Post-feminism. First, I want to come back to something I said before. Choice feminism oftentimes adapts criticisms towards the feminist movement as legitimate and changes according to them. By celebrating the success of liberation of the second wave, it credits the movement, but at the same time accepts a post-feminist standpoint. We don't need feminism anymore. Look around, we already have some female presidents and CEOs. This narrative is extremely dangerous and heavily influences people, for instance, in my surroundings in Germany. It leads to the impression that certain experiences made by women are individual and personal attacks. They are evaluated as singular instances, and we are not giving the language to present them as part of a patriarchal system. This inhibits political action and presents those still fighting for feminism as annoying. They should be content with what we already achieved. Many opponents will call this victim feminism. This idea is also at the core of some choice feminism proponents, which argue that feminism turned into victimization and we should instead praise women for their proactive pursuit of what they want in life. Accepting this judgment is affirming the idea that if you criticize the unequal power relations in the world, you're being judgmental and victimizing yourself, and should instead just fight your way to the top anyway. Again, this is highly problematic as it moves away from political action and delegates the responsibility to the individual. Does that sound familiar? 2. Neoliberalism. Exactly. This is where neoliberalism plays in. Instead of taking political action, women should be content with the choices they already have and are responsible for their own lives. Also, choice feminism is very conveniently compatible with consumerism. While the second wavers often criticize the beauty industry and beauty standards for women, with choice feminism you can buy new shoes every week from your girl boss salary and still be a feminist, which I'm not saying you can't, but we need to acknowledge that this is the best thing that can happen for neoliberalism as a system. Do not criticize the system too much. Do not judge yourself for wanting to fit toxic, whitewashed, fatphobic beauty standards. You can still get plastic surgery and be a feminist. Of course, on the other hand, it is also problematic to forbid women from doing so and put the burden of each individual feminist choice onto them. This is where it gets complicated, as the neoliberalism accusation can kind of be used from both sides. We should also not get into the direction of saying that all women need to ignore the deep influence of the societal expectations towards them before the system has even changed. It is only through actual political action that the conditions these choices are made in can be tackled. Let's look at a quote about this by Ferguson. Quote, "Choice feminism uncritically embraces consumerism, and most problematically for the future of feminism, it deters women from being active in politics to improve childcare, public schools, and working conditions, all of which are deemed private matters." Unquote. And what does political action rely on? 3. Solidarity. The solidarity aimed at by choice feminism is one of silence. It is one of avoiding conflict by avoiding judgment, and this has two important aspects. First, it kind of operates under the assumption that a woman cannot possibly live with being judged by another woman. Judgment is seen as something so bad that it should be avoided altogether, since in no way would it be possible for two people with different opinions to coexist, very much falling into the trend of filter bubbles and polarization. Maybe it would be better to adapt a vocabulary of dialogue instead of using the word judgment. In fact, it is also problematic to openly condemn individual women for their choices made within a patriarchal system. The real ideal would be a dialogue about these choices and not shying away from considering this a decision anti-feminist if it encourages political action. Because, second, this development would target a solidarity that is based on avoidance, not acceptance. Instead of going into the discussions, which can of course be hard, we should just dodge these difficulties and say we are fine with everything while in reality holding different beliefs. Also, there's no incentive for women to step out of their traditional role of caretakers, still holding them within the quote-unquote private sphere. Just as described in the quote above, these are only deemed private matters by neoliberalism, since they are actually highly political and influenced by power structures and societal expectations ingrained into us from our birth. This, as critics argue, might slightly influence the choices we take. 4. Choice and oppression. The second wave of feminism prominently fought for the private sphere to be considered political. It is not a coincidence, a personal preference, that we have a gendered division of labor and other gender roles in our society. Regarding it as private, however, takes the attention away from the underlying political power relations that actively shape it. Let's look at this within the context of choice. For example, in a country with a gender pay gap, little support in childcare, and specific societal expectations towards women, consider a new mother. Is it really her free choice to decide to stay at home for a few years and later work part-time? Because if she doesn't, she will probably be judged for being selfish and career-driven, and in most cases the household will probably have less total income. Does oppression in this case really end with making it theoretically possible for her to go back to work? If we define it that way, we end the fight against oppression right there. But isn't it actually the societal conditions for making a choice that define whether it is free or oppressed? Deciding between facing societal resistance and financial problems as an alternative to the traditional way is not really a choice. It is therefore not really unambiguously fine to celebrate said decision as feminist. But it is also not okay to actively condemn a woman that made this choice, since she is not in fact individually responsible for it. With the first path, we basically end the feminist fight and consider it done. With the second one, we again delegate responsibility to the individual, which is shaped by her political surroundings. This is especially important when it comes to intersectionality, as certain choices might be harder to make for people coming from other cultural backgrounds. We cannot blame them for wanting to maintain a good relationship with their family, and if their family clearly advocates for a gender division of labor, this is not anyone's personal fault or bad intention. Again, the personal is political. The only thing we should do is not step away from this political sphere, enabling actual liberation for all. In choice feminism, it seems as if all women already have the same possibilities to choose, while these factors I just named actually paint a very different picture. Wanting to fit in and not be a social outcast because of your 100% feminist choices is not a bad thing, since the very things you can choose from are not real alternatives. Go the traditional path and feel an inner guilt for contradicting your own beliefs, or challenge all societal norms while being criticized for it by everyone around you. As Eva Chen argues, the freedom and choice communicated here is not a humanist universal freedom, but, quote, neoliberal choice refers to one's ability to choose maximum material gain and profit. In order to construct one's own self, an agency now means the ability to be active in this materialistic, profitable, self-actualizing project, unquote. Thereby, the choices made by people will often be the normative ones, as the state provides the best conditions for them, just like the example of the mother from before. What I want to say is, the fight is not over until everyone is free. Our liberation is bound up with the liberation of all, returning to the words from the very beginning. Thank you for listening.